I never thought my first assignment would be babysitting a mafia boss. Yet here I was, Leo Reed, a trained bodyguard standing behind a wheelchair that held perhaps the most dangerous man in the entire city, Nolan Cross. He sat perfectly still, his gray eyes lost in some distant world, as if his body contained no soul at all. I'd been told he was paralyzed, an assassination attempt had shattered his spine. But something felt off. Leo, his voice was flat, emotionless. Take me to the garden. I nodded and began pushing the wheelchair. His mansion was silent. The creepy kind of silent. The staff moved quietly, as if holding their breath in fear. I noticed one thing immediately. Nobody looked him directly in the eyes. As if everyone knew something I didn't. In the garden, I stopped near a bench. A light breeze was blowing, but it had no effect on him. He just stared ahead, empty, cold. Then suddenly, his fingers twitched. Very slightly. I almost missed it. My heart began racing. Paralyzed people don't move their fingers. Do you need anything, sir? I asked in a professional tone, testing the waters. Just fresh air, he replied. But there was a shadow in his eyes. Judging. Observed. That night, as I was returning to my quarters, I heard voices from the kitchen. 2 staff members were whispering. How long before this new bodyguard figures it out? Not long. The boss tests everyone. If this one gets exposed too, then... I froze. Test. Then suddenly everything went silent. I quickly walked away. But one question dominated my mind. If Nolan Cross isn't paralyzed, why is he pretending? And more importantly, if I know the truth, will he let me live? The next morning, I was extra careful while preparing Nolan for breakfast. I observed his every movement, but carefully, so he wouldn't notice. As I placed the breakfast tray on the table, I saw his eyes fixed on me, intense, measuring. You're different from previous bodyguards, he said suddenly. My hand paused for a second. In what way, sir? You observe. Most people just follow orders. But you think as well. Was this a compliment or a warning? I couldn't tell. I simply smiled politely and stepped back to my position. But my heart was still racing, because now I knew for certain, Nolan Cross was testing me, and I didn't know what would happen if I failed. The following days became a careful dance. I watched him constantly while pretending not to. Every time he lifted a cup, adjusted his position, or turned his head, I cataloged it. The medical reports I'd read described severe spinal trauma, injuries that should have left him with tremors, weakness, limited motor control. Yet his movements were precise, controlled, almost too perfect. During an afternoon meeting with his financial advisors, I stood in the corner, making myself invisible. The men spoke in hushed tones about money laundering operations, offshore accounts, and international deals. Nolan sat motionless in his wheelchair, occasionally nodding, playing the part of a weakened boss who could barely participate in his own empire. But I noticed something nobody else seemed to catch. When one advisor mentioned a problematic shipment, Nolan's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. Anger, sharp and controlled. Then it was gone, replaced by that blank expression. After everyone left, he gestured for me to approach. What did you think of them? He asked quietly. I chose my words carefully. They seem efficient, sir. Efficient, he repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. That's a diplomatic answer. You're learning the game quickly, Leo. That evening, I decided to search for more information. The mansion had a library, and I found old newspapers archived there. Articles about Nolan Cross's rise to power, his ruthless business tactics, his enemies who mysteriously disappeared. And then, 6 months ago, the headline, Mafia King Survives Assassination, Left Paralyzed. The article showed photos of the attack site, medical statements, expert opinions. Everything looked legitimate. Almost too legitimate, as if carefully orchestrated. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't hear footsteps behind me. Interesting reading material. Nolan's voice came from the doorway. I spun around, my hand instinctively moving toward the weapon at my hip. He was still in the wheelchair, but something about his posture seemed different, more alert, more predatory. Just familiarizing myself with background information, sir, I said, keeping my voice steady. Of course. He wheeled himself closer. Tell me, Leo, what conclusions have you drawn from your research? This was it. The moment of truth. I could play dumb, pretend I believed everything. or I could take a risk. I think, I said slowly, that you're the smartest man I've ever met. His eyes narrowed. Explain. A paralyzed boss is vulnerable. People get comfortable around vulnerability. They make mistakes, show their true intentions. I paused. It's brilliant, really. The silence that followed felt endless. Nolan studied me with those cold gray eyes, and I genuinely didn't know if I'd just signed my death warrant or passed some kind of test. Then, incredibly, he smiled. A real smile, not the empty expressions he showed everyone else. You're either very perceptive or very stupid, he said. Possibly both, sir. He laughed. A short, sharp sound. Most people see what they want to see, what they're told to see. But you, he wheeled even closer. You see what's actually there. Is that a problem? I asked. That depends entirely on what you plan to do with that information. I met his gaze directly. I plan to do my job. Keep you safe. Nothing more. Nothing less. Even though you know I'm not actually helpless, especially because of that, I replied. A man smart enough to deceive everyone around him is exactly the kind of person I'd want to work for. Nolan regarded me for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if coming to a decision. Tomorrow morning 7 a.m., come to my private study, alone. He turned the wheelchair toward the door, then paused. And Leo, don't disappoint me. I genuinely like you. It would be unfortunate if that changed. After he left, I sank into a chair, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I'd just confirmed that Nolan Cross was faking his paralysis. I'd essentially called him out on his deception. And instead of having me killed, he'd invited me to a private meeting. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like I'd just stepped into something far bigger and more dangerous than I'd imagined. The wheelchair was just the beginning. The real question was, what game was Nolan really playing? And what role did he expect me to fill? Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept replaying every interaction, every word, every glance. By the time dawn broke, I'd made my decision. Whatever happened in that study, whatever Nolan asked of me, I was in. For better or worse, I was now part of Nolan Cross's world. And there was no going back. 7 a.m. arrived too quickly. I stood outside Nolan's private study, my hand raised to knock, when the door opened on its own. He was inside, standing, actually standing by the window, looking out at the city below. No wheelchair in sight. Come in and close the door, he said without turning around. I did as instructed, my eyes taking in every detail of the room. Dark wood paneling, shelves filled with books and what looked like surveillance equipment, a large desk covered in documents and laptops. This wasn't just an office. This was a command center. You're probably wondering why I'm showing you this, Nolan said, finally turning to face me. Without the pretense of disability, he was imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, radiating an authority that the wheelchair had deliberately hidden. The thought crossed my mind. I admitted. He moved toward me, and that's when it hit me. His scent. As an omega, my sense of smell was sharper than most, and Nolan's scent was overwhelming. Dark cedar mixed with something smoky and intense. It wrapped around my senses like a physical force, and I had to actively work to keep my expression neutral. I've been playing this paralysis game for 6 months, he explained, circling around me slowly. Do you know how many people I've tested in that time? Advisors, guards, business partners, even family members. And I managed to keep my voice steady despite his proximity. 80% failed. They tried to take advantage, steal from me, betray me to my enemies. 20% passed by simply remaining loyal and keeping quiet. He stopped directly in front of me. But you are the first person who not only figured it out immediately, but had the courage to tell me to my face. I didn't exactly tell you. You might as well have. That comment about me being smart? You were letting me know you'd seen through the act. His gray eyes seemed to look straight through me. Now I need to know. Then I trust you. The question hung in the air between us. This was more than just about keeping his secret. He was asking if I could be part of whatever larger plan he was orchestrating. What exactly are you asking me to do? I countered. Be more than just a bodyguard. Be my eyes and ears. Watch the people around me. Tell me who's loyal and who's waiting for an opportunity to strike. He stepped back, giving me space to think. In return, I'll give you access to information and resources you've never dreamed of. You'll be part of my inner circle, and if I say no, He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you'll continue being my bodyguard, nothing more. You'll go back to believing I'm paralyzed, and we'll never speak of this again. I'll find someone else for the role I need filled. I should have taken the easy option. Should have walked away from the dangerous offer. But something in me, maybe ambition, maybe curiosity, maybe something else entirely, pushed me forward. I'm in, I said, just like that. No questions about payment, guarantees. What happens if things go wrong? If things go wrong in your world, money won't save me anyway, I pointed out. So yes, just like that. Nolan studied me for another long moment, then extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that came from hard work despite his supposed disability. Welcome to the real game, Leo Reed. The rest of that day was a crash course in Nolan's actual operations. He showed me surveillance feeds of his various businesses, introduced me to his truly trusted associates, a small group of 5 people who knew the truth, and explained the threats he was currently monitoring. There's a rival organization run by someone named Felix, Nolan explained as we reviewed security footage. He's been trying to move into my territory for months. The assassination attempt 6 months ago, that was him. But instead of killing me, he gave me the perfect cover to identify traitors in my organization. How many have you found? I asked. 12. So far. I've been documenting everything, building cases. When the time is right, I'll deal with all of them at once. He pulled up a file on one of the screens. But there's one I'm particularly interested in. Cooper, my senior advisor. I believe he's Felix's main contact inside my organization. I recognize the name from yesterday's meeting. What's your plan? Patience. Let him think he's succeeding. Let him gather more co-conspirators. The bigger the conspiracy, the more devastating the exposure will be. Nolan's expression was cold, calculating. Felix thinks he's slowly taking over my empire from within. What he doesn't realize is that I'm controlling the entire game. As the day progressed, I began to understand the full scope of what Nolan was doing. This wasn't just about catching traitors. He was rebuilding his entire organization from the ground up, keeping only those who proved truly loyal and creating a network so secure that future betrayals would be nearly impossible. You're not actually planning to stay in that wheelchair forever, are you? I asked during a brief break. No. Eventually, I'll make my miraculous recovery, but only after I've cleaned house completely. He leaned back in his chair, looking almost relaxed for the first time. The question is timing. Move too soon and some rats escape the trap. Move too late and Felix might actually do some real damage. How will you know when the time is right? I'll know. His eyes found mine. And you'll help me know. Fresh perspective, no biases, no history with these people. You'll see things my trusted circle might miss, because they're too close. That evening, Nolan returned to his wheelchair, before the staff brought dinner. The transformation was remarkable. He went from powerful and commanding to weak and helpless in seconds. It was like watching an actor slip into character, except the stakes were life and death. During dinner, several staff members served us. I watched them carefully, noting who avoided eye contact, who seemed nervous, who appeared too casual. One of the younger servants, a man named Marcus, kept glancing at Nolan with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, not fear, something else. After dinner, when we were alone again, I mentioned it to Nolan. Marcus has been with me for 3 years, he said thoughtfully. Never gave me reason to doubt him. But you're right, something felt off tonight. Add him to the watch list. As I prepared to leave for my own quarters, Nolan stopped me. One more thing, Leo. Your instincts are good, but I need to know, are you hiding anything from me? Any secrets that could become liabilities? The Omega question hung unspoken between us. I'd been masking my scent with suppressants since I arrived. Standard practice in my profession. Most alphas couldn't tell, but someone as observant as Nolan might eventually notice the slight chemical undertone. I made a split-second decision. If this partnership was going to work, it needed honesty. I'm an Omega, I said plainly. I use suppressants to hide it, because being known as an Omega bodyguard would make clients question my ability to do the job. Nolan's expression didn't change. I know. My heart skipped. You? No, I've known since the first day. Your suppressants are good but not perfect. I can still catch traces of your real scent underneath. He stood and walked to his private bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. The question is, does being an Omega affect your ability to do this job? No, I said firmly. Good. Then it doesn't matter to me. He handed me one of the glasses. In my world, competence and loyalty are the only things that count. Everything else is irrelevant. We drank in silence, and I felt something shift between us. Not just professional respect, but the beginning of genuine trust. Dangerous, complicated, possibly foolish but real. Get some rest, Nolan finally said. Tomorrow Cooper has requested a private meeting with me. I want you there watching everything. As I left his study, I realized I was smiling despite the dangerous game I'd just joined. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next morning arrived with tension crackling through the mansion like electricity before a storm. Cooper's private meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Nolan had specific instructions for me. Stay behind me slightly to the left, he'd said during our early morning briefing. Your furniture, invisible, but watch everything. His hands, his eyes, where he positions himself in the room. How he reacts when I give him certain information. Now I stood in position as Cooper entered Nolan's office. The senior advisor was in his 50s, gray at the temples, wearing an expensive suit that screamed old money. His smile was professional, concerned, exactly what you'd expect from a loyal employee visiting his disabled boss. Nolan, thank you for seeing me, Cooper said, settling into the chair across from the wheelchair. I wanted to discuss the Eastern Territory situation. Felix's people have been making moves. Tell me. Nolan replied in that weak, tired voice he used for the act. As Cooper laid out his report, I watched carefully. His body language seemed normal at first. Leaning forward, making appropriate eye contact, hands gesturing to emphasize points. But then I noticed something. Every time he mentioned Felix, his right hand would briefly touch his tie, a nervous tell or something more. I think we should consider pulling back from the waterfront operations, Cooper suggested. Temporarily, of course, just until we can assess Felix's full strength. That would leave a massive opening for Felix to move in. I kept my expression blank, but Nolan must have caught the slight tension in my posture. Interesting suggestion, Nolan said slowly. What do you think, Leo? Cooper's eyes flicked to me, surprised that Nolan was asking a bodyguard's opinion. Sir, I don't think Leo has a military background, Nolan interrupted. Strategic thinking. I value his perspective. All eyes turned to me. This was another test. I realized, not just for Cooper but for me too. Retreating from a strong position invites aggression, I said carefully. It signals weakness. If Felix is testing our defenses, showing strength would be more effective than pulling back. Cooper's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With all due respect, military tactics don't always apply to our business. Perhaps, I conceded, but the principle remains. You don't surrender territory unless you absolutely have to. Nolan nodded slowly. Leo makes a good point. Let's table the retreat option for now. Instead, I want increased security on the waterfront. Can you arrange that, Cooper? Of course, Cooper said, but his smile looked strained. I'll handle it immediately. After Cooper left, Nolan remained silent for a long minute. Then, without warning, he stood from the wheelchair and walked to the window. What did you see? He asked. The tie touch every time he mentioned Felix. Could be nerves, could be a signal he's thought about Felix more than he's letting on. I paused. Also, he really didn't want you to tie the waterfront. That suggestion to retreat felt rehearsed. Good. You're learning to read people. Nolan turned to face me. Cooper met with someone last night. One of my surveillance teams caught him at a restaurant on the edge of town, talking to a man we haven't identified yet. The conversation looked intense. You think it was Felix's representative? I know it was. We got photos. I'm having them analyzed now. He moved to his desk and pulled up images on his computer. I'm going to give Cooper enough rope to hang himself. That retreat suggestion? I'm going to pretend to consider it. Make him think he's succeeding in weakening my position. Won't that actually weaken your position? I asked. Not if I'm prepared. I'll appear to pull back while actually reinforcing everything. Cooper will report to Felix that I'm vulnerable. Felix will make his move. And when he does, Nolan's style was cold. I'll be waiting. The plan was risky, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless. Over the next week, I watched it unfold. Nolan played his part perfectly, seeming to slowly agree to Cooper's suggestions, appearing weaker and more dependent on his advisor's guidance. Cooper grew more confident, more careless. Meanwhile, Nolan's actual preparations were extensive. He moved loyal guards into key positions, reinforced security without Cooper knowing, and set up surveillance on everyone in Cooper's contact network. It was like watching a master chess player setting up checkmate 10 moves in advance. But something else was happening too. Something I wasn't prepared for. The more time I spent with Nolan, the more I felt drawn to him. It wasn't just his scent though, that alone made my omega instincts hyper-aware whenever he was near. It was his mind, his strategic brilliance, the way he could be ruthless one moment and surprisingly gentle the next. One night, after a particularly long day of monitoring Cooper's activities, Nolan and I were alone in his private gym, a space he'd shown me where he actually worked out, maintaining the strength that his paralysis act supposedly prevented. "You're distracted," he observed as I reviewed security footage on a tablet. "What's on your mind?" I couldn't tell him the truth. That I was developing feelings that went way beyond professional respect. That every time he stood close to me, every time his scent wrapped around me, I had to fight the urge to lean closer. That I was in serious danger of falling for my boss, who also happened to be a mafia kingpin using me as a pawn in his dangerous game. Just thinking about Cooper's next move, I lied. Nolan set down his weights and grabbed a towel. "You're a terrible liar, Leo. One of the few areas where you need improvement." He walked closer, and I forced myself not to step back. "But I won't push. Everyone's entitled to their private thoughts." He was giving me an out, and I should have taken it. Should have kept that professional distance. But something in his eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before, made me reckless. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said. "You can ask, I might not answer. Why did you really bring me into this? There are others in your trusted circle who could have watched Cooper." Nolan considered the question, his gray eyes studying my face. "Because you're not emotionally invested in the outcome. The others have worked for me for years. They have history, relationships, biases. You're objective." He paused. "And because I wanted to see what you'd do, how you'd handle the pressure, the danger, the moral complexity." "Testing me again," I said. "Always. That's how trust is built in my world." He was very close now, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body after his workout. "But also, I enjoy your company. You challenge me. Most people are either too afraid or too sycophantic to tell me when they disagree. You're neither. Is that wise? Enjoying the company of someone you're testing?" His smile was slight but genuine. "Probably not. I've been accused of many things, but wisdom in personal matters isn't one of them." The moment stretched between us, charged with something unspoken. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the tension. "Cooper's on the move," Nolan said, checking the message. "Meeting someone at the old warehouse district. This could be it. The actual handoff with Felix's people." Within minutes we were ready. Nolan back in his wheelchair playing the helpless boss. Me in full bodyguard mode, weapon concealed but ready. Several of his trusted guards positioned around the mansion, waiting for orders. "Whatever happens tonight," Nolan said as we prepared to confront Cooper, "remember that this is what I do. This is who I am. If that's too much for you, now is the time to walk away." I met his eyes directly. "I'm not walking away, even if it gets violent. Even if you have to cross lines you've never crossed before." "Even then," he nodded, something like approval in his expression. "Then let's go catch a traitor." As we moved through the mansion toward the confrontation that would change everything, I realized I'd made my choice. Not just to stay, but to fully commit to Nolan's world. With all its darkness and danger, there was no going back now. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice whispered that this was about more than just loyalty or professional duty. This was personal. Deeply, dangerously personal. But there was no time to examine those feelings. Cooper was waiting, and the game was about to reach its critical moment. 3 weeks passed since the night we confronted Cooper. Nolan's paralysis act continued flawlessly in public while privately, he moved through his world with lethal precision. I'd become deeply embedded in every aspect of his operations. Attending meetings, reviewing strategies, helping plan moves against remaining threats. The line between right and wrong had blurred so completely, that I could barely see it anymore. But my biggest problem wasn't moral ambiguity. It was biology. My heat cycle was approaching, and I could feel the symptoms building. Omega heats were predictable, every 3 months like clockwork. Restlessness crept through my body. My temperature ran slightly higher than normal. Everything felt more sensitive, more intense, and worst of all, Nolan's scent affected me more powerfully than ever before, cutting through my suppressants like they were nothing. "Leo," Nolan said one afternoon as we reviewed financial reports in his office. "Are you all right? You've seemed off for the past 2 days." "Just tired," I said quickly, keeping my eyes on the documents, avoiding his gaze. But Nolan was too observant to be fooled. "You're lying." He stood from his chair, we were alone, so he wasn't bothering with the wheelchair, and approached me. "What are you hiding?" My pulse accelerated. If he figured out what was happening, if he sensed my approaching heat. "Nothing," I said firmly, though my voice carried a slight tremor I couldn't quite suppress. He came closer, and I saw his nostrils flare slightly as he caught something in the air. His eyes narrowed in sudden understanding. "You're going into heat soon," he said. Not a question. A statement. My world stopped. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I started, but words failed me. "How long have you been hiding this?" His voice was low, carefully controlled, but I heard the edge underneath. "It's not about hiding," I snapped. Frustration and fear, mixing together. "It's about survival. If people knew I was an Omega going through regular heat cycles, I'd stop being a bodyguard and am just an object. A weakness, something to be used or protected, never trusted to actually do my job." Nolan was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently grasped my wrist. "Do you think I'd see you that way?" he whispered. His gray eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Every alpha I've ever met cares about one thing when they learn what I am. Control, possession. It doesn't matter how capable I've proven myself to be. I'm not every alpha." His grip tightened slightly, still gentle but firm. "Leo, over these past weeks, you've proven yourself in ways that have nothing to do with your designation. You understand me. You challenge me when I need it and support me when I don't expect it. That kind of trust is incredibly rare in my world." Emotions welled up in my eyes, made worse by the hormonal fluctuations already affecting me. "When?" he asked directly. No judgment in his tone, just practical concern. 2 days, I admitted quietly. "Then you can't stay here." My heart sank. Of course. He'd send me away, distance himself from the complication. But then he continued, "I have a secure cabin in the mountains, private, isolated, stocked with everything you'll need. Guards will be positioned around the perimeter, but far enough away to give you privacy. You'll be completely safe there." You're not dismissing me?" I asked, shocked. His eyes softened in a way I'd never seen before. "Never. You're mine, Leo. My bodyguard, my partner, and..." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "And that's something more than that." My heart did something dangerous in my chest. A flutter of feeling I couldn't ignore or rationalize away. 2 days later, my heat began while I was alone in the mountain cabin. Nolan had personally driven me there, checked every security measure twice, made sure I had medical supplies and everything else I might need. Then he'd left, giving me the privacy I'd need to get through this. But the heat was unbearable. I lay curled on the bed, my body burning, my mind hazy and unfocused. Nolan's scent haunted me. I could still smell traces of it on the blanket from when he'd carried supplies inside. I wanted him desperately. It was biological, instinctual, but it was also something deeper, something emotional that terrified me. 1 day passed. Then 2. I barely survived, the medication providing some relief but nowhere near enough. My body was screaming for an alpha, and not just any alpha, it wanted Nolan specifically. On the 3rd night, I heard the door unlock. Nolan stepped inside, and the sight of him made me gasp. "Why are you here?" I managed to say, hardly believing my eyes. "Because I can't leave you alone like this," he said, locking the door behind him. I tried. I stayed in the city, told myself you needed space, that this was the professional thing to do. But he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I couldn't get you out of my head. Your scent, even from miles away. The thought of you suffering, this isn't right." I protested weakly. "Nothing about this is wrong. He moved to the bed and gently touched my forehead. His hand felt blessedly cool against my burning skin. Leo, I won't force anything. I would never do that. But if you want me here, if you need me, I'm not going anywhere. My body trembled violently. The heat was consuming me from the inside out, and his alpha scent was exactly what every cell in my body craved. Please, I whispered, my resistance crumbling. Stay with me. Nolan gathered me carefully into his arms, strong and protective and warm in all the right ways. Always, he promised, pressing his lips to my forehead. That night, every barrier between us dissolved. The professional distance, the careful boundaries we'd maintained, all of it burned away in the heat. Bodyguard and boss, omega and alpha, professional and personal, the lines blurred until they didn't exist anymore. When morning came, the intensity of the heat had decreased, soothed by Nolan's presence. We lay tangled together in the bed, and I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Do you regret this? He asked softly, his fingers threading through my hair. No, I whispered honestly. Do you? Not even slightly. In that moment, I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt like the most natural truth in the world. I was falling in love with Nolan Cross, and that was the most dangerous thing that could possibly happen to either of us. When my heat finally ended and I returned to the mansion nearly a week later, everything had changed between us. Not in obvious ways that others could see, but in the subtle things. The way Nolan's hand would linger when passing me documents, how his eyes would find mine across a room and hold just a moment too long. The unspoken understanding that existed in our silence. But we both knew we had to be careful. In the Mafia world, any weakness was fatal. And emotions? Those were the most dangerous weakness of all. Nolan continued his public paralysis act perfectly, playing the role he'd maintained for months. But privately, when we were alone, everything was different. He was more open, more willing to show vulnerability in ways I suspected he'd never shown anyone before. One evening we stood on the mansion's terrace, the city lights spreading out below us like fallen stars. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. Everyone thinks I'm incapable of feeling anything real, Nolan said quietly, staring at the horizon. Cold, calculating, heartless. Just a machine that makes strategic decisions. And are you? I asked, turning to look at him. I thought I was. I made myself that way deliberately. In this world, emotions get you killed. He paused, then reached out and took my hand gently. But with you, I feel feels I haven't felt in years. Maybe ever. And that's absolutely terrifying. My throat tightened with emotion. Nolan, I know how complicated this is, he continued. I'm a criminal. I've killed people, destroyed lives. You shouldn't be with someone like me. This whole thing is probably a terrible mistake, yet here I am, I said softly, squeezing his hand, and I'm feeling things too, things I probably shouldn't. Vulnerability flashed across his face, rare and precious. So what do? We're careful. We keep this between us. Because if anyone finds out, they'll target you, Nolan finished, his jaw clenching. And I'll burn the entire city down before I let that happen. But fate had different plans. The following week, a new threat emerged. Victor Kane, one of Nolan's oldest and most ruthless rivals, returned to the city. I'd heard stories about Victor, his cruelty, his complete lack of conscience, his Hicker hatred for Omegas. He knows, Nolan told me during an urgent late-night meeting in his private office. His face was tight with controlled rage. Victor has photographs of us together. Someone managed to get pictures when I dropped you off at the cabin. My blood ran cold. How? You said the security was... There was a spy in my organization. Someone I trusted. His voice was bitter. I've already eliminated them, but the damage is done. Victor has the photos, and now he knows exactly how to hate me. I can handle myself, I started. No, Nolan's hands came up to cup my face, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Leo, you don't understand what Victor is. He doesn't just kill Omegas, he tortures them, breaks them psychologically and physically, for entertainment. I won't let that happen to you. I can't. So what are you planning? To hide me away? If necessary, yes. No, I said firmly, pulling away from his grip. I'm your partner, Nolan. Not some damsel who needs protecting. If Victor comes for us, we fight together. I'm not running. His expression was a mixture of pride, fear, and frustration. You're the most stubborn Omega I've ever met. You're Omega, I corrected. He smiled despite the tension, though it was tinged with sadness. Then he pulled me into a tight embrace. Forever, he whispered against my ear. Over the next few days, security doubled around both of us. Nolan positioned his most trusted guards nearby, though discreetly enough that it didn't draw attention. But Victor was smart and patient. The attack came 2 days later, swift and brutal. Victor had been watching our patterns, learning our routines. He struck at multiple locations simultaneously: safe houses, business operations, key contacts. It was a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm our defenses. The worst attack happened when Nolan and I were returning from a meeting. One moment we were driving through the city, the next there was an explosion and gunfire erupting from multiple directions. Our driver was hit immediately, the car swerving violently. Nolan shoved me down, covering my body with his. "Run when I tell you," he shouted over the chaos. But I didn't run. Instead, I drew the weapon he'd given me weeks ago and returned fire through the broken window. My military training took over, muscle memory guiding my aim. Because I wasn't just an Ecker, I was a trained soldier who happened to be an Omega. When Nolan's backup team arrived and the attackers retreated, both of us were wounded. A bullet had grazed Nolan's arm and my shoulder was bleeding from shrapnel. In the hospital room later, as we were both being treated, Nolan looked at me with a mix of frustration and relief. "You didn't listen," he said. "I never will," I replied, managing a smile despite the pain. His eyes grew intense, filled with emotion too powerful to contain. He reached up to cup my face with his uninjured hand. "I love you." Time seemed to stop. Those 3 words, words I never expected to hear from Nolan Cross, hung in the air between us. "Nolan," my voice was barely a whisper. "I know this is insane," he continued. "This situation, this life, everything about us is wrong in so many ways. But I love you, Leo. And I'll protect you with everything I have, even if it costs me my life." Tears spilled from my eyes, overwhelming emotion breaking through my control. "I love you too," I finally admitted. "I think I have since almost the beginning." He kissed me then, desperate and claiming yet gentle despite everything we'd just been through. In that moment, we both understood the truth. This love couldn't exist in any normal world. It was dangerous, forbidden, complicated beyond measure. But maybe we'd never been meant for a normal world. And maybe this impossible love was exactly what we both needed. Still, Victor remained out there, waiting, planning his next move. The final confrontation was inevitable, and we both knew it. The final confrontation with Victor was unavoidable. We both accepted that reality. Within a week, Nolan had crafted an elaborate plan, a final trap that was carefully calculated, extremely dangerous, but potentially decisive. "There's a meeting tomorrow," Nolan informed me. That evening, as we sat in his private study, rain pattering against the windows. "Neutral territory," Victor demanded it, face to face, no intermediaries. "And you're actually going?" I asked carefully, already knowing the answer. "Yes." Because Victor still believes I'm paralyzed and vulnerable. That misconception is his fatal flaw. "But, Leo," Nolan interrupted, moving closer to me, "you shouldn't be there. The risk is too great." "I'm going," I said with absolute finality. "With you? Always. This isn't up for discussion." He exhaled in frustration, but seeing the determination in my eyes, he relented. "I'm possibly stubborn," he muttered, though a small smile touched his lips. "Yours," I repeated softly, the word carrying weight beyond its simplicity. The meeting location was an abandoned warehouse near the docks. The building was dark, cold, with an eerie emptiness that set my nerves on edge. Nolan sat in his wheelchair, the perfect picture of disabled vulnerability. I stood behind him in full bodyguard mode, weapon concealed but accessible, every sense on high alert. Victor was already there when we arrived. A tall man with a scarred face and eyes that held nothing but malicious amusement. Around him stood nearly a dozen armed men, all watching us with predatory intent. "Nolan Cross," Victor said mockingly, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The legendary Mafia king, reduced to wheels and weakness. How absolutely pathetic." Nolan said nothing, maintaining his blank expression. Victor circled closer, then turned his attention to me. He inhaled deliberately, his smile widening. "And this must be your pet Omega," he said with cruel laughter. "How adorable. Tell me, Nolan, what exactly does your little companion do for you? Handle your special needs since you can't manage them yourself?" My jaw clenched hard enough to hurt, the insult burning through me. But I maintained absolute composure. This was part of the plan. Let Victor grow overconfident. Let him believe he'd already won. "Listen carefully, Nolan," Victor continued, moving around the wheelchair in slow circles. "I'm offering you one final opportunity. Surrender your entire territory to me. Everything. And leave your pretty Omega behind as well. Otherwise—" Nolan's hand moved with lightning speed. The gun appeared, aimed directly at Victor's head. Victor froze mid-sentence. "Otherwise what?" Nolan asked calmly, then stood up from the wheelchair, smoothly, powerfully, every movement radiating controlled strength. Victor's men instantly went for their weapons, but red laser dots appeared on each of them. Nolan's hidden snipers, positioned throughout the warehouse structure, had every enemy locked in their sights. This can't be possible," Victor stammered, finally understanding. "You're supposed to be paralyzed." "I never was. Not for a single moment," Nolan said coldly, taking a step forward. "This entire charade was designed to expose people exactly like you. Enemies who thought they could exploit perceived weakness. Traitors who revealed themselves when they believed I was vulnerable." Victor realized he was completely trapped, with no possibility of escape. "And regarding my Omega?" Nolan continued, his voice taking on a deadly edge. "Leo isn't anyone's pet. He's my equal, my partner in every sense. And if you'd actually touched him, your death would have been slow. Excruciatingly slow." Victor made a desperate attempt to escape, signaling his men to attack. But Nolan's snipers fired with perfect precision. Within seconds, every one of Victor's guards fell. Victor stood alone, terror replacing his earlier arrogance. "Please, Nolan, have mercy," he begged desperately. "Mercy?" Nolan's laugh was cold and completely humorless. "How many Omegas did you torture for your entertainment? How many innocent people did you murder? And now you dare ask me for mercy?" He pulled the trigger. One shot. Clean. Final. Victor collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Heavy silence filled the warehouse. Nolan's team moved in professionally, efficiently cleaning the scene as if this was routine procedure. When everything was finished, Nolan came to me. His hands were shaking not from fear but from adrenaline, relief and overwhelming emotion. "It's finished," he whispered, looking into my eyes. "Yes," I said, stepping forward and pulling him into a tight embrace. "It's over." We both understood that this wasn't truly the end. In his world, there would always be new threats, new enemies, new challenges. But this particular chapter had closed, and we were still standing. Together. 3 months later, life would never be normal. We'd both accepted that truth completely. Nolan remained a mafia boss, dangerous and lethal, equally respected and feared throughout the city. But now he operated openly, the wheelchair abandoned forever, the pretense gone. The truth was public knowledge. Nolan Cross had never been weak. As for me, I was still officially his bodyguard. But everyone now understood I was far more than that. I was his partner, his mate. We'd completed the bonding process last month. A simple silver ring circled my finger. Understated but meaningful beyond measure. "Do you ever regret any of this?" Nolan asked one night as we lay together in bed, intertwined, city lights filtering through the windows. "Never once," I smiled, resting my cheek against his chest. "Do you?" "Not ever." He kissed my forehead gently. "You're my greatest strength, Leo. Not a weakness. Strength. And I'm never letting you go." "Good," I whispered, closing my eyes contentedly. "Because I'm not leaving either. Ever." Our life was violent, dangerous, completely unpredictable. Nothing like what normal couples experienced. But it was ours. And nothing, no one could tear us apart. Because love isn't always soft and gentle. Sometimes love is a battle. A choice to survive together. A decision to stand side by side against everything the world throws at you. And we'd chosen each other, for always.